Whatever happened to John Wick?
John Wick, fashion icon and notable dog person, returns in his latest installment, John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. John travels the world to find himself, but maybe he'll just find some love along the way.
This is the third entry in the John Wick series, which in my opinion is probably the best action franchise in Hollywood right now. It very much feels like a sequel, especially to the second film, and the movie makes the excellent choice of taking it out of the established world to expand upon it. And while the last film did something like that on a more local level, this does it on a much larger international scale. The film, as a result, is a lot fresher when it comes to the action, set pieces, and characters. I think what surprised me the most about this film is how comedic it was, and it wasn't a case of making jokes or cracking one-liners. It was just playing up the absurdity of this world and the situations that are presented in the movie, and it did so without taking me out of the movie. It felt very believable. You know, characters that are in awe of John Wick or are almost honoured to fight him, and it's funny and humorous, but it's believable because of how legendary a figure John Wick is in this world. What a good sequel should do is normally go a little bit deeper on the characters and the world, and this movie does that very well. We learn a little bit more about Wick's backstory without it being a little bit overbearing or not allowing for more development in future installments. We learn about the Continental and the assassins and their codes and their customs and the rules that govern this world, basically who oversees all these assassins. John isn't the only character to get some development in this movie. Winston, played by Ian McShane, the Bowery King, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and the concierge of the Hotel Continental, Lance Reddick, all have a little bit more to do in this film, and we also get a little bit more insight into what their life is like. And that really works because outside of John, those are probably the most prominent characters in this series, but of course, there's lots more new characters also introduced in this film. Probably most notable is Halle Berry's character of Sophia and her two dogs, which have featured quite prominently in marketing. I was actually surprised how little she was in this movie. Thought she'd be in it a bit more. But I have to admit that I think the film was better for just her being in it for a little bit. Other new characters work mostly in service of the plot, Angelica Houston and Asia Kate Dillon. But I think as part of the ensemble, as much as they all are trying to drive this larger plot forward and, you know, factoring into John's story, they at least normally had memorable moments, and I did enjoy some of these characters, and in a few cases I'd like to see them again. As for the villain, he's very different to the previous villains he's faced in the franchise, but it was actually a lot better. He's somewhat humorous, a bit more charismatic, and allowed for a different element to the fight scenes. Without giving too much of the plot away, the film essentially deals with the repercussions of the last film, and to a lesser degree, the first film. And what's great about it is that the action in this movie has been ramped up considerably, not just in intensity, but with new elements introduced. Aside from the standard gunfights, we get knife fights, horse fights, dog fights, belt fights, bike fights, and book fights. The ingenuity of the violence and action is only matched by how silly it all feels at times, but the movie is clearly aware of it and even makes a joke of it. And it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it expects that by now you're either bought into the world of John Wick or not interested at all, and because of that, any hand-holding or restraint from previous entries is gone, and it allows us to double down on the violent capabilities of our lead with a tongue stuck firmly in its cheek. Yet despite all this, the film has a clear sense of reality and grit that make it seem believable. It's a real testament to the fight choreography and stunt work, and it's really benefited by having director Chad Stahelski, who's a former stuntman. He gives his action scenes and fight choreography an aggressiveness that's rare in modern action movies. There's a real artistry to this film, you know, it feels very practical at times, and I think that's very evident, and it draws you into the film even more. I would have some minor complaints though. One is, considering how practical it is, there's one scene that feels a little bit lesser because of how effects driven it is. It just doesn't connect as well, but that would be a nitpick. The length as well, it's maybe a tad too long, just a tiny bit. Also, towards the end of the film, one of the action scenes I felt wasn't as distinct as previous ones, and maybe it was because they'd done similar stuff in the movie and this film just felt like it had a bit less ingenuity. So initially, the shootout towards the end of the film I thought was a bit derivative, but it does come around. And that's only derivative by comparison. It's still fantastic, and by the end it had also won me over. These are only minor quibbles though, as the film really feels like it's firing on all cylinders. The characters get developed, the action gets upped, the world gets expanded, and it offers a great follow-up to the story from the previous entries. We also get some insight into where the franchise is going to go next, and I don't think there's a chance it can be as fresh as this entry, but I am still very invested and interested in seeing where these characters go, because if nothing else, this series has set such a high bar for itself that I want to see what happens next, and if nothing else, the action will no doubt deliver. Older characters get a bit more development, and new characters get welcome introductions. The action in the film is frenetic, and it benefits from the introduction of several new elements that allows it to build on the strong foundation laid down by its predecessors. This introduction of a more self-awareness and humour also make the franchise feel somewhat invigorated. This is the best John Wick film yet, in my opinion, and there's a lot of interesting possibilities laid down for the future. John Wick 3 is the Mutts Nuts. Now, I don't always get hit in the face with books, but when I do, I make sure it's American Gods by Neil Gaiman. What do you mean he's not going to pay us? That cheap British mother.